We have already discussed the warning contained in the Declaration of Independence. This video is for August 24th. Welcome to YesToHellWith.com. Government is not to be altered for light or transient causes. The standard is much higher. The Declaration speaks of a long train of abuses and usurpations. So the question now is rather quite simple. Has the American government crossed that threshold? Look at history. The federal government criminalized political criticism under the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Government protected slavery while proclaiming that all men are created equal. From the founding era until the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865. Native people were removed from their lands by force following the Indian Removal Act of 1830, culminating in removals such as the Trail of Tears in 1838 and 39. States practiced eugenics, and in 1927, the Supreme Court upheld compulsory sterilization in Buck versus Bell. Beginning in 1942, the federal government confined Americans of Japanese ancestry without individual proof of wrongdoing. The government conducted the Tuskegee syphilis study from 1932 until 1972. Intelligence agencies experimented on human beings through programs such as MK Ultra, begun in 1953 and officially terminated in 1973. The FBI infiltrated and disrupted political organizations from 1956 until 1971. The NSA engaged in domestic surveillance through programs like Project Shamrock from 1945 to 75. And Minaret from 1967 to 73, long before most Americans knew such programs existed. War powers expanded, emergency powers expanded, executive power expanded, administrative agencies multiplied, particularly the Progressive Era and the New Deal beginning in the 1930s, and unelected officials increasingly issued rules carrying the force of law. The monetary system changed. During the Civil War, Congress authorized federal paper currency known as greenbacks beginning in 1862. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Private monetary gold ownership and gold convertibility were dramatically restricted beginning in 1933, followed by the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. The dollar was ultimately severed from international gold convertibility on August 15, 1971. Over generations, the purchasing power of currency declined while government debt expanded. Then came September 11, 2001. Whatever one's conclusions about unanswered questions surrounding that event, what followed is beyond dispute. The Patriot Act was enacted on October 26, 2001. Broader surveillance, broader intelligence powers, broader secrecy, broader federal reach. The Real ID Act followed in 2005. Massive data collection and technological capabilities that allow government to know more about the lives of ordinary Americans than previous governments could have ever imagined. Then came the pandemic in 2020. Businesses closed, schools closed, churches restricted, movement restricted, employment was conditioned. Medical decisions became entangled with government mandates. Emergency authority became the justification for powers many Americans would have considered unimaginable only months earlier. Now let's look at the pattern. A crisis occurs. Government claims additional power. The people are told that the circumstances require it. And once the crisis passes, much of the machinery remains in place. Another agency, regulation, database, surveillance capability, another expansion of executive or administrative authority. Are these isolated events, or are they part of a long train? Because one bad law can be repealed, one corrupt official can be removed, one abuse can be corrected. But when the same movement occurs across different administrations, different political parties and generations, and different emergencies, the problem may no longer be the individual abuse. The problem may be structural. And there is a common denominator running through much of this history. Governmental power expands while the requirement that government demonstrate its authority, jurisdiction, and factual basis becomes weaker. Government asserts authority. The people presume it exists. An agency claims jurisdiction. The people accept it. A regulation creates an asserted obligation. Enforcement follows. And too often, the foundational questions are never asked. What is the authority? What establishes jurisdiction? What status is being applied? What facts create the obligation? Where does the power end? That is how a free people can gradually become subject to powers they never consciously agreed to surrender, not necessarily through one dramatic event, but incrementally, presumption by presumption, emergency by emergency, regulation by regulation, until what once would have demanded extraordinary justification becomes ordinary government. That is when the words alter or abolish become relevant. And alteration does not mean chaos. It does not mean violence. It does not mean destroying government. The issue is whether institutions that have departed from their lawful purpose must be restrained, decentralized, reformed, or returned to their original constitutional boundaries. Government does not create the rights of the people. Under the American founding principle, government exists to secure rights that already belong to the free and sovereign people. Therefore, government must be measured by whether it remains within delegated authority, respects jurisdiction, honors due process, protects liberty and property, and remains accountable to the people. If the common denominator of this long train of abuses is the unchecked expansion of presumed authority, then the remedy must begin there. Authority must be demonstrated, jurisdiction established, status identified, obligations supported by law and fact, and enforcement must follow lawful authority and not substitute for it. That is the purpose of the Liberty Dialogue system. It restores the question that should precede every exercise of governmental power: authority, jurisdiction, status, standing, obligation, enforcement, and beneath them all, what is being presumed. But asking the questions is only part of the remedy. There must also be institutions close enough to the people to recognize when government has exceeded its limits. That brings us back to the county, back to constitutional officers, to sheriffs, juries, back to state and local government, and to officials who understand that their duty is not simply to accept every assertion of higher authority, but to understand the constitutional boundaries of their own offices. That is the purpose of constitutionalcounty.org. The Liberty Dialogues provides the method of inquiry. Constitutional County provides the institutional framework for applying that discipline close to the people. One asks, show me the authority. The other asks, who has the duty to recognize when that authority has exceeded its lawful boundary. That is alteration, not destruction, not disorder, but restoration. Power closer to the people, authority limited by law, jurisdiction demonstrated rather than presumed, officials accountable for the powers they exercise, and citizens educated enough to ask the questions. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this long train of abuses is not simply that government accumulated too much power. It is that the people gradually stopped requiring government to prove that it possessed that power in the first place. If that is the common denominator, then that is where alteration must begin. Back to authority, back to jurisdiction, back to constitutional boundaries, back to local accountability, and back to the people. Because the objective is not to destroy government. The objective is to restore government to its proper place. A servant, not a master. And as always, may truth reign supreme.